Hello Movie Mavens, welcome back to another video on the B Movies channel. My name is Bailey and I put the B in movies. So like I said last week, I hope everybody's having a wonderful November, is having a wonderful fall. We're getting so close to, it's crazy to me how close we are to Christmas. That's wild. We're even closer to Thanksgiving, which is also wild. But I just hope you're having a wonderful holiday season. I know that, to get a little bit deep for a second, I know that if you've lost someone, that the holidays, for me, since we lost my mom, the holidays are very hard. And so I do hope that you have a great support system, or that if you need that extra, I will always say that everyone should go to therapy. If you need that extra help or that extra person to talk to, please seek them out. But I just wanted to take a minute and take an aside to acknowledge that the holidays can also be very hard for people. I am myself included. And so hope you're having a wonderful season. I hope you're taking care of yourself. Don't be afraid to reach out to your support system, chosen family, biological family, whoever your support system may consist of, or if you need that extra help, there's BetterHelp. There are so many programs out there to find that extra person to talk to. So, not to start on a downer, but I just wanted to acknowledge that because I think it is important to acknowledge that sometimes the holidays are very sad and very triggering. So, that aside, again, I hope everybody's doing well. Let's go ahead and dive into this week's blog roundup. So today, we have, as always, 5 blogs. For those if you're new here, we post over on bmovies.blog Monday through Friday, a new piece, as well as Bite Size Sunday, which is an Instagram exclusive review, every Sunday on our Instagram, which is just B Movies channel, same as our YouTube. So this week over on the B Movies blog, on Monday we have a spotlight on Robert Rodriguez. He's one of my favorite directors. If you aren't familiar with his work, Desperado, The Faculty, Machete, Death Proof, the list goes on and on. We did on Tuesday a Brady Bunch spotlight. For some reason, as someone who is obsessed with the 90s, the Brady Bunch was a big cultural reference from the 90s, and that's probably because, like my sister, for example, is 15 years older than me. She was born in the late 70s, and so the Brady Bunch is just this weird cultural phenomenon that has existed decade after decade. They're one of the most probably recognized sitcom families, and so we just do a deep dive into the Brady Bunch. Wednesday, we talked about Thanksgiving horror, which is going to be one of our deep dives today. And by deep dive, we're just going to talk a little bit about Thanksgiving horror. Really excited for, at the time of recording this, I haven't seen Eli Roth's Thanksgiving yet, but I'm very excited to. On Thursday, we talked about music biopics. Here's the thing. And I say this in the piece, I know there are a lot of obvious gaps and just glaring errors within my music biopic knowledge. I'm never going to recommend things I have not seen to y'all, so I do keep it honest, I do keep it real, but I just wanted to do something about the genre because we hadn't tackled it yet. But that is up for you, and again, please be kind. I know that there are some big holes and big gaps there. And then today, which is going to be our big deep dive, we're launching a brand new series on the B Movies blog. It's one I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and it's finally happening. So we are introducing our new series called Lights, Camera, Albums, wherein I take an album, break it down track by track, and assign and pair a movie to each song on the album and kind of walk you through. It's similar to what we did with Taylor Swift's Eras as movies, but we are not limiting ourselves to one genre. So in one piece, it may range from everything you'll see today, because that's obviously going to be our deep dive. I may choose movies that are everywhere from 200 Blows to Tamara. You don't know. It's just what I feel based on the lyrics, based on the vibe of the song, and I'm just really excited. We have a few more scheduled already with some other albums. I'm just picking them how I'm selecting which albums to do up top. It's just albums. Folklore, which is the one we're doing today, that was what inspired this entire idea. So I wanted to start with folklore, but it's just things I'm listening to or some of my favorite albums that I've listened to over and over and over again. And I'm just really excited to launch this series. And I really hope that you love it as much as Elliot and I do, because we're both very, very excited. So before we dive into Lights Camera Albums, let's talk about Bite Size Sunday. And so as I mentioned up top, Bite Size Sunday is an Instagram exclusive review on a piece of content. It can be a movie, a series. I've done music videos. There's a teaser I want to get into soon. And it's just a piece of content I either liked or I didn't like, but there's not quite enough content there to make a piece, but I still want to give a review. And so I give a hint every week on our YouTube channel, and then that lives exclusively on the B Movies Instagram. So the hint for this week is, we know about the king, but can our suspicious minds handle the story of his queen? I know this sounds like the Joker and Harley Quinn. It's not. I will say that it's not the Joker and Harley Quinn. So don't get your mind out of the DC comics. It's not that. So that's our hint for this week. So just to recap, over this week on the B Movies blog, you have a Robert Rodriguez spotlight, Brady Bunch spotlight, piece about Thanksgiving horror, music biopics, and then today is the introduction of our new series, Lights Camera Albums. So with all of that out of the way, I think we can dive into our first ever Lights Camera Albums. And so just as background, I came up with this series 2 years ago. And just with last year, a lot happened in my personal life. It's not a secret. If you know, like my mom, like last year my mom passed away. It was just, there was a lot of stuff going on. So I didn't get to launch it last year like I wanted to. And then when we started the B Movies blog, I didn't want to start right out of the gate with a series like this. I wanted to give y'all time to see how I write, because I know that I write about pop culture a little bit differently than other people do, and I just wanted us to get into a really good spot. And so finally I told Elliot, I was like, let's launch it. Let's do it. And so we're launching with Folklore because, like I said earlier, it was the album that inspired this series. It was when I listened to Folklore, the idea kind of started making its way through my brain. And then 2 years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And so I wanted to kick off the series with the album that inspired it. And so what I thought we would do is kind of go song by song, like we do in the piece, just to give a little bit more context to the reasons that I picked the movies that I did. And I just, again, since this is a brand new series, I just thought it would be fun to make it our deep dive. And then afterwards, we'll get a little bit into Thanksgiving horror. So I have one bonus track on Folklore. I know that with Taylor Swift, there are always additional tracks. I do have the Lakes on here, but I know that there are other versions. I know there are remixes. We're just sticking to the regular track list plus the Lakes. And so with Taylor Swift stuff moving forward, just know, or like I know that Olivia Rodrigo, we will be covering both Guts and Sour. I know that for Guts, there are some bonus tracks and that it depends on the vinyl. We are just going to stick to the regular track list, so just know that going in. So first up, we have the one from Folklore as Past Lives. And if you haven't seen Past Lives, first of all, it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. It's about two people who, I feel like, because I have this person, I'll just be honest, I've written about my Maddie McKimmon before. He doesn't have social media, it doesn't matter. And if he sees it, I haven't spoken to him in years, it doesn't matter. We all have that person where we're just so connected to them and we just have such a strong bond, but it's not the person we end up with. And on the Goosebumps series, they called it an almost couple, and I think that that's a great way to put it. It's one of your almosts. And even if we don't wind up marrying that person within this lifetime, we still had a deep connection with them. Again, Past Lives is wonderful if you've seen it. And Taylor talks about her past love, about how they have these feelings of admiration and sadness, and Greta Lee's character throughout the film has those. And I just think that they sync up wonderfully, because it's all about the what ifs. And if we could have been together, here's what would have happened. And so I just immediately thought of Past Lives. Next up for Cardigan, I chose Definitely Maybe. This was one of the hardest ones for me. And I don't know exactly why, but I could not find something I felt perfectly connected. And some of these aren't perfect connections, but this, I just for some reason with Cardigan, I had a really hard time finding a movie that I thought paired well. But when I thought of Definitely Maybe, I was like, well, that makes sense, because you have Isla Fisher's character April and Ryan Reynolds' character Will, and their relationship is strained. They don't speak for years, but then they come back together. And I think Cardigan, to me, is how Will talks about April, because Abigail Breslin, his daughter, she makes the mention about how April is the only name he didn't change in the love story. How the way that he talks about her is just different from the way that he talks about the other women. And so I think, to me, Cardigan is like the story Will is telling his daughter, and how he reminisces about April in such a positive and wonderful and loving way. So next up we have The Great American Dynasty. The Last Great American Dynasty is Fried Green Tomatoes. And I know that the subject matter is obviously a bit different, but when you take a step back and think about how Iggy and Ruth's relationship just rattles their entire town to its core, because, they're in a same-sex relationship. After all of the events of their love story, the town is basically deserted. And their story inspires Evelyn, who's played by Kathy Bates, to finally stand up for herself and to be that woman that had a marvelous time ruining everything. And I think that that is very similar to Taylor Swift buying Rebecca's house and continuing that tradition, because Evelyn at first is a very timid housewife, and she, by the end, is fully sticking up for herself and is standing up for herself and is inspired by these two very strong women, just like Taylor Swift was by Rebecca. Next on the list is Exile, featuring Bon Iver, as Marriage Story. This one was very easy for me to connect, and it was one of the first connections that I made. I see it as the perspectives of Charlie, who's played by Adam Driver, and Nicole, who's played by Scarlett Johansson. It's the whole scene. I know it's been memed so many times, but it's so similar to their scene when, Adam Driver's punching the wall and stuff. It's these two ex-lovers who are singing from different perspectives. And I just think that that's how Marriage Story watches for me. It's just two perspectives, and how one person's perspective can be entirely different from the other, even though they're in the same relationship. And I mean, Exile is it's become one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs of all time. And for me, Marriage Story was a no-brainer. So next up, we have My Tears Ricochet as Blue Valentine. This movie destroyed me. It was one of the first movies I saw when I moved to Austin. This movie destroyed me. I've not watched it in years, because every time I watch it, I am just a blubbering mess on my couch. I can't, it just rips my heart out and stomps on it, spits on it, and then runs it over with a bus. It's so hard to watch. And the one thing that I like about this connection is I think that this could be from either Cindy's perspective, who's played by Michelle Williams, or Dean's perspective. Because from Cindy's perspective, she's falling out of love with Dean. She has had all of these traumatic experiences, and then you have Dean's who's, struggling with alcoholism, and it could be from either one of their perspectives. And just Blue Valentine's Day, trigger warning, content warning if you haven't seen it. I would quantify it with that it has some domestic violence, and some scenes are hard to watch, so just a trigger warning, content warning there for Blue Valentine. And it's also just really, really, really sad. So next up we have Mirror Ball as Boogie Nights, and I know that it's a little hard to see the connection, but just to put a little bit of method behind my madness. Mirror Ball, a lot of it reminds me of like the glitz and the glam and the excess of the late 70s into the early 80s. And there are specific lines throughout that remind me of Roller Girl, who's played by Heather Graham, and Amber Waves, played by Julianne Moore. And it's kind of this, it has this essence to it that just reminds me of how you can shimmer, be it for a moment or a lifetime. And so for me, it just Boogie Nights. It just, sometimes things just fire off in my brain, and this was one of those where it's just like Boogie Nights, done and done. So next up we have 7, which I put as Bridge to Terabithia, and I know that the kids in 7 are obviously younger than the kids in Bridge to Terabithia, but the idea of sharing these childhood experiences with this person that you may never see again, or that you only see during childhood, and just wondering what became of them, or just thinking about them fondly from time to time, really connected with me. And I think that those are big themes within both. And like obviously Bridge to Terabithia is a lot sadder, but it just encapsulated that childlike whimsy. And I was talking with one of my friends the other day, but it's recognizing things as an adult that you didn't recognize as a kid. Like you understood, like when they talk about your house must be haunted because your dad's always mad, not realizing until you're an adult that it was just an adult with anger issues, and that there was a lot of trauma there, and not unpacking that until you get older and you're able to really comprehend what happened. And I just think that both of those really align. I almost went with My Girl, but Bridge to Terabithia had a little bit more of the whimsy that's captured in 7. So next up we have August as Dirty Dancing. This was another easy one for me. When you have Baby, played by Jennifer Grey, and Johnny, who's played by Patrick Swayze, their romance can only exist within Kellerman's. Like, this romance would not have the same passion, it would not have the same quality outside of this one summer. But they will always have those memories of that one whirlwind summer romance. And it will probably be ingrained in their minds for the rest of their life. And so that's how I see August. I know that August is part of the Trinity, which is, August, Betty, and Cardigan. But I just think that Dirty Dancing is perfect. This Is Me Trying, which is another one of my favorite songs, as The Spectacular Now. If you've seen The Spectacular Now, Sutter, who's played by Miles Teller, has an issue with alcohol. And there's a specific scene where he's at the bar, and it made me, that's the scene that played in my mind when I was listening through folklore to write this piece. And I like to think of This Is Me Trying as kind of like the conversation that Sutter had at the bar when he left Amy at the bus stop, because he's supposed to meet Amy, they're supposed to go away together, and he doesn't show up. And I think that even though he does drink, contrary to, but I didn't pour the whiskey, the line in the song, I just really see this from Sutter's perspective 1,000%, because it's so similar to the things that he's gone through throughout the film. Illicit Affairs as Call Me By Your Name. Elio and Oliver, who unfortunately is played by Armie Hammer, who is a piece of garbage. Don't forget that. Their relationship is kept discreet. Elio is ultimately heartbroken because he is able to accept himself in a way that Oliver won't. And not like as in he doesn't accept Elio, he doesn't accept himself. And I really think that this movie could be nestled really well into the film, especially towards the end, because, they had this similar to, even like Baby and Johnny and Dirty Dancing, they had this whirlwind romance that they will remember for all their lives, but it was confined to that one moment in time. And Illicit Affairs, I think, encapsulates it because there's this secrecy to it that, Baby and Johnny obviously didn't have to face because they were a same-sex couple. Next up, we have Invisible String as Serendipity. Serendipity is one of my guilty pleasure movies. I don't necessarily believe in guilty pleasures, but if I did, Serendipity would be on that list. It's all about fate and trusting the universe. If you aren't familiar, in the film, Jonathan, who's played by John Cusack, and Sarah, played by Kate Beckinsale, they put out into the universe. She writes her phone number in a book, and he gives her a glove. There's something with a glove. I'm trying to remember the glove. But there's something with a glove. Somebody gives someone a glove, and then she writes her number in a book. And it's basically like, if we're meant to be together, you'll find my number, so on and so forth, and the universe will bring us back together. And so throughout the song Invisible String, Taylor Swift talks about how all of these different little things brought her together with this person. And I think that it really personifies that idea that Taylor Swift is talking about. Next up we have Mad Woman as The Craft, which is one of my favorite pairings for obvious reasons. But in my mind, I see Nancy, who's played by Fairuza Balk, singing this after what happens with Chris. And you could even argue that she's singing it to both Sarah and Chris. And especially after the bedroom scene, the famous scene where she's up on her toes and she glides across the floor and glamours Chris. I just very much see this from Nancy's perspective of like, oh, you want crazy? I'll show you crazy. While also defying that stereotype of like, just because a woman is mad or upset or, we have feelings, that we're crazy. Or you want crazy, I'll show you crazy. It's that same, defying that same stereotype. So next up we have Epiphany as Saving Private Ryan. Epiphany, this album, I love this album so much, and I think the storytelling on this album is so powerful, and I truly believe that Taylor Swift is an excellent songwriter, hands down. I think she's a phenomenal writer / songwriter. And I think this is about her grandfather. And I like to think of Epiphany as being from the perspective of Private James Ryan, who's played by Matt Damon, when he's talking about his grandchildren, when he's talking to his grandchildren about the war. And, in the song, there's some things you just can't speak about. Him talking about all the atrocities that he saw while in the war. Next up we have Betty as the Duff. I love if you've not seen the Duff, it's so good. It has Robbie Amell, it has Mae Whitman, who, I love Mae Whitman. I just think she's gotten a raw deal, because there are so many, because she doesn't get cast and stuff as much as she should. And so I'm a huge Mae Whitman stan, and I just truly love this movie. And I think you should definitely watch it. So I see Betty from Wesley, who's played by Robbie Amell's perspective. And I could see him singing it to Bianca before her date with Toby, who's played by Nick Eversman, and Toby's a jerk. And he winds up bringing his girlfriend, who's played by Bella Thorne, to Bianca, who's Mae Whitman's character. They're like her special spot that she shared with Wesley, and she winds up seeing him there with her. And so I like to think that it's kind of from his perspective, and the dance, instead of Betty dancing with someone else, it's Wesley kissing someone else. And I think that these two go very well together because they both culminate in a dance, and then, Wesley ultimately choosing the girl. So next we have Pieces Spring. So Spring is another movie that I think is a little bit underrated. Spring is about Evan, who's played by Lou Taylor Pucci, and Louise, who's played by Nadia Hilker, and she is essentially this missing link primordial character who every year shifts into a different type of being. And I'm not doing a very good job of describing it, but I would definitely give it a watch because I think it's very underrated. It came out several years ago, and I think it's a very good movie. But I digress. But I see Louise singing this to Evan and being like, I can never give you peace. Like, there will always be something with me. There's baggage with me. This will never be like a smooth sailing, easy peasy relationship. And like, I'm in if you're in, but I just want you to know that up top that there are going to be challenges. And so that's why I thought of Spring, because, Louise has, dare we say, a complex background. And so I just see her as trying to explain that to Evan. So next up we have Hoax as A Star Is Born. And A Star Is Born has been remade so many times, most recently, obviously, with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. But the end of the film has stayed the same throughout all of the iterations. And the basics have remained the same as well. It's a couple with a toxic relationship, and unfortunately, the male lead always winds up dead. And I think that this works on two levels. I think that it works in the midst of the relationship and in the aftermath of their partner's death. Because I think it tells the story of this toxic relationship that this person just can't leave, which is the nexus for A Star Is Born. And then lastly, we have The Lakes, which I have as off-season. I know this is a strange pull, but I think it's a great movie, and I think that it works on some level. You have Jocelyn Donahue, who plays Maria, who was in House of the Devil, if you haven't seen it. She's also in the Father's Day segment of Holidays, which is, like, give us a movie. I can't get enough of that segment. I will just watch that segment sometimes off the cuff. It's so good. So she visits a remote island that her mother grew up on. It's basically a Lovecraftian nightmare. There are also a lot of other great and familiar faces in that film. But I see The Lakes as connecting to off-season because it's set in a coastal region. Maria is part of this larger prophecy. She is part of something that's bigger than herself. And I interpret The Lakes as a sorrowful song, and I just think that Maria having to be part of this prophecy and then being stuck in this Lovecraftian town, it ties together in my head. And it's one of those, I get if it doesn't in other people's, totally understand. We all know here, if you've been around here, my brain works sometimes in very mysterious ways, and so that's how I connected them. So that wraps up our first edition of Lights, Camera, Albums. Like I said, I think we have 4 more scheduled for this year. Something like that, 3 or 4. We have some Olivia Rodrigo, we have some Miley, we have some Billie Eilish. I already have the idea for several more. So I hope you guys like this series. Elliot and I really, really enjoyed doing it. I will link this piece specifically, since it's one of our deep dives, in the description box, as well as the Taylor Swift eras as horror movies, so that you can see kind of the rhythm of how this series is going to go. So the last thing we have to talk about, I just want to dive into Thanksgiving horror briefly. It's not going to be a big deep dive, but Thanksgiving horror is such an interesting subgenre to me, because there are very few. You have Thanksgiving, you have Blood Rage, Eli Roth's Thanksgiving is coming out, Pilgrim, which is the Into the Dark, which is actually a really good movie. I miss Into the Dark. I do miss Blumhouse, if you ever want to bring it back. For those who don't know, Blumhouse for a couple years did this series where every month they would release a horror movie that was like based around something like a holiday within that month, or something that had to do with that time of the year, and Pilgrim was one of them. Pilgrim's really good. But I just think it's this very interesting subject of horror, and we get into a lot of like the weird subgenres here. But Thanksgiving horror is so fun to me because There are so few movies that fall within this subgenre, but the ones that are in this subgenre are just so good. Like, Blood Rage is a classic, you know. For those who don't know, that is the movie that has the famous line, "That's not cranberry sauce." And so it's just I think it's a fun subgenre, and I welcome any additions into it. I've not seen, at the time of recording this video, Eli Roth's Thanksgiving, but if you don't know, watch the trailer. You can also watch the short in Grindhouse. It's one of the fake trailers to prep yourself. Fair warning, it does look like they're going to do the trampoline scene. If you know, you know. I'm not going to describe that scene for you. Use your imagination or look it up. So I'm interested to see how that's going to go. But yeah, Thanksgiving horror. You know, nothing says Thanksgiving like a turkey puppet wearing a man's face and making a bunch of very crude and disgusting jokes. So I think that's going to do it for today's video. Like I said, I'll link the Thanksgiving horror piece, the Taylor Swift eras as horror movies, and the First Lights Camera albums in the description box below. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. What are you doing? Subscribe. It's free. Turn on all notifications, because if you have personalized, for some reason, because I've done this too, it won't always immediately alert you when a video is up, and you definitely want to get that notification because, you know, we do our weekly deep dives, and we also do updates on all of our favorite horror series and ARGs like Welcome Home, Project Earth, which we're a little over a month out from the, as of now, finale to Project Earth, and I'm so, I hope it's not the end, but I'm so excited. Greylock, Midwest Angelica, we do updates on all of those, and so you definitely don't want to miss out. So turn on all notifications, subscribe, like, comment. We love seeing your comments. We love seeing that you're enjoying the videos. Be sure to, if you don't know who we are, that's me and Elliot, who is my creative consultant, editor, partner in B-Movies, so on and so forth. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at Lisa_Frankenstein_. Be sure to follow Elliot at reading.with.red. Be sure to follow us on Instagram. It's just at B-Movies channel, same as our YouTube. And to read all the pieces that we talk about here and almost 200 more, go over to bmovies.blog. We have so many pieces for you. We soft launched at the end of January, started doing regular content in March, and baby, we have so many pieces for you. At this point, it's like 150 plus. So, and about everything you can dream of, from what we talked about today to horror ARGs and analog series, to one-off reviews of movies, to how much I hated Beau is Afraid. We've got you covered. So I think with that, all that's left to do is fade to black.